Chosen one, if you're watching this video right now, it's no accident. You weren't led here by chance. God himself has guided you to this moment because an attack against you has just exposed something profound. The number 1212 flashing on the thumbnail is what caught your eye and pulled you in. In the Christian faith, 1212 echoes the biblical pattern of 12 tribes, 12 apostles, and the completed government of God, doubled to signal perfect alignment and divine rank being revealed. Right now, you're about to uncover how their assault didn't diminish you. It unlocked the truth about your spiritual authority. Stay with me until the end, chosen one, because this is not just a message. It's a divine disclosure that will confirm your position and shift everything. Before we dive into this life-changing revelation, I need you to do 3 things to activate the divine energy of this message. Pause this video. Hit that like button to send this truth soaring to others whose rank is under fire. Subscribe to join thousands of chosen souls standing firm in their calling, and leave a comment with your city or country below. Then drop 1212. That 1212 is a sacred signal to the universe. A declaration that you're ready to embrace the rank heaven has stamped on you and step into the authority their attack accidentally unveiled. If your spirit feels a pull to stay, it's because this message was crafted for you. Don't ignore it. Don't turn away. This is your moment to rise above their schemes and walk in the rank God has already confirmed. They figured your silence signaled disqualification, and your humility betrayed a lack of standing. Yet they failed to grasp this heaven frequently cloaks its commanders in tenderness. You stayed quiet, not from fear, but because the king hadn't issued the order to speak. The composure they ridiculed wasn't inaction, it was holy discipline. You held your tongue amid their slander. You withheld exposure when they spread falsehoods. You refused to strike back as they sought to shame you. To the untrained observer, it appeared frail. But has anyone witnessed a storm gathering force behind the clouds? True strength doesn't always roar. It bides its time. What if your refusal to react served as your most potent reply? And what if heaven gauged their character by how they handled one it had already enthroned in secret? When Jesus faced Pilate and declined to justify himself. Matthew chapter 27 verse 14 mentions that it wasn't due to a lack of words. It was because he allowed heaven to respond. His quiet wasn't capitulation. It was calculated. That's the caliber of strength they failed to comprehend. And the same goes for those who misjudged you. You see, when pride fuels the engine, folks, presume silence equals defeat. But kingdom authority operates differently. Genuine command doesn't broadcast itself. It requires no ovation. It avoids the limelight race. It simply occupies space and alters environments without fanfare. You had no need to counterattack because enduring unflinchingly already landed the hit. Each instance you opted for poise over theatrics, you issued an alert they overlooked. And once they overstepped, convinced you were vulnerable, a transformation began. Mysterious interruptions sealed opportunities, fractured alliances, restless evenings. Their reality started crumbling not from your hex, but because they hexed the blessed. Creation's principles murmur this reality quietly. The jaguar issues no warning snarl. It glides soundlessly until it pounces. Bamboo lingers subterranean for years prior to upward surge, then explodes skyward by feet daily. That described you submerged, dismissed, misinterpreted. Yet you cultivated foundation, not fame. And your ascent proved abrupt, inexorable. Psalm chapter 37 verse 6 states, "He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday." God required no volume from you. He intended daylight disclosure, and that instant has dawned. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who quietly resisted Hitler's regime. He didn't scream in public squares. He wrote, he prayed, he sheltered the vulnerable. His humility was misread as irrelevance until his quiet resistance became a spiritual revolution that outlasted the Third Reich. But what happens when the proud mock what they don't recognize? What happens when people mistake consecration for cowardice and provoke heaven in the process? Take Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. Promising miracles with blood tests, she presented confidence, control, and charisma. But it was noise without truth. Her arrogance masked fraud, and when the silence of evidence finally surfaced, the empire fell. Real power does not require illusion. It holds up under scrutiny. In a sleepy town in Oregon, a man named Callum ran a rescue shelter. He wore second-hand clothes, drove an old truck, and rarely spoke at meetings. But behind the scenes, he was feeding families, paying off strangers' hospital bills, and funding scholarships anonymously. A rival, thinking he was just another broke farmer, tried to publicly smear him, accusing him of misusing funds. But as the investigation unfolded, dozens of testimonials surfaced, receipts appeared, and city officials stepped in, not to arrest Callum, but to award him. The man who didn't speak had all along been the pillar of the town's survival. Your story isn't that different. You were judged by surface metrics, how loud you spoke, how much you posted, how visibly you flexed. And yet, all along your strength was rooted in how little you needed to, because you had what they couldn't counterfeit: authority granted in secret places. Isaiah chapter 30 verse 15 confirms, "In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." You were quiet, not because you lacked strength, but because that silence was your strength. You didn't react the way they wanted, and that was the reaction. You didn't perform for their audience, and that was your power. You didn't need the room's approval because heaven already voted yes. And when they kept pushing, thinking you'd eventually break, they collided with the truth. You weren't soft, you were shielded. You weren't absent, you were armed. Now they dream of you. They feel uneasy when your name comes up. Their peace evaporates not because you haunted them, but because conviction does. Because once you've violated a divine boundary, your spirit knows it. You didn't act like a warrior because you didn't need to. You were one. The most dangerous ones don't need to prove it. They're already backed. Just like David, who said nothing when mocked by his own brothers, but took down Goliath in one throw because his authority wasn't in his words. It was in his calling. And now, your calling speaks louder than anything you could have shouted. The ones who mistook your humility for weakness have discovered that the quiet ones, they're often the most dangerous. Not because they are angry, but because they are anointed. They assumed it was merely personal, a trivial spat, an ideological clash, a controllable spark of tension. But they erred gravely, fatally so, because targeting you, God's chosen one, meant more than assaulting an individual. It meant assaulting an entire domain. They weren't prodding a human. They were challenging a sovereign seat. You see, you're far more than a kind and convicted soul. You're a conduit, a heavenly decree in motion, a blueprint alive with sacred vibration. Thus, dishonoring you isn't mere fleshly slight. It's a spiritual protocol breach. It's infringing on the holy statute. And knowingly or not, that ignites repercussions not from your spite, but from kingdom equity. What if their whispered slander equaled courtroom treason in eternity's halls? What if their mishandling ignited unseen verdicts? They'll labor lifetimes to undo. Recall Elisha's jeering by youths in 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 23-24. They taunted his baldness and jeered. Heaven remained unmoved by humor. Swift divine reprisal ensued, not from Elisha's retaliation, but because his anointing commanded honor. The domain defended him. That's the dynamic alive in you. No curse from your lips required, not even a word, yet heaven recorded. Angels noted the affront. Your silence prompted the spirit realm to act where speech wasn't needed. A beehive doesn't strike from pettiness. It strikes when its queen faces threat, and with the colony's future in her defense is reflex. So with you. Divine protection layers you invisibly not from fragility, but because your mandate teems with potential. You bear heritage fate directive and threats that face neutralization. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a man of peace yet a lion in spirit. He didn't raise weapons in South Africa's darkest days. He raised his voice. And yet for every time he was threatened or discredited, Something higher protected him not because of his own strength, but because of the mission he carried. His presence irritated systems because his very existence was a rebuke to darkness. Now contrast that with a man like Martin Shkreli, the former pharmaceutical executive widely known as Pharma Bro. Introduced as a financial prodigy, he gained fame for inflating the price of a life-saving drug from $13.50 to $750 per pill overnight. His decisions weren't just cold, they were cruel. He smirked in congressional hearings, dismissed public outcry, and mocked the suffering of others. But eventually judgment caught up. Not only was he sentenced to prison for securities fraud, but his name became synonymous with greed. Power rooted in ego always decays, because when you use your influence to manipulate instead of to serve, the realm will respond not with thunder, but with unraveling. In the village of Marenbrook, a teacher named Sailor worked quietly for years, nurturing orphans and tutoring children forgotten by the system. No one knew she'd once been assigned to a divine mission through a dream where she saw her hands glowing as she taught. But when a new administrator tried to remove her out of jealousy, strange things began to happen. Records went missing. The school's funding was frozen. Every attempt to push her out failed, or eventually the administrator stepped down, not out of guilt, but exhaustion. You, the chosen one, mirror this exact blueprint. You've been wrongly tagged as overly emotional or dramatic, while in truth the backing realm has merely reacted to disrespect. As upheaval strikes their existence, plans shrouded in fog, prospects evaporating, bonds dissolving abruptly, they might label it chance. Yet the Spirit discerns otherwise. Exodus chapter 14 verse 14 affirms, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." That composure wasn't frailty, it was your cue. You raised no hand, yet heaven intervened. For heaven never permits its ambassadors assault without reply. Furthermore, Psalm chapter 105 verse 15 issues the directive, "Do not touch my anointed ones, and do my prophets no harm." Their rudeness wasn't casual. It trespassed holy ground. They handled divine purpose like trash. Now they discover painfully God's plans aren't toys. What if their quip-fib scheme was celestial defiance? What if your serene stride mirrored their revolt? True command doesn't menace. It doesn't posture. It skips reprisal. It simply exists with gravitational pull warping opposition. That's unfolding now. Their schemes warp under inexplicable load, not your might, but your sender's invincible war. They warned not just you, they warned about your origin. Such contests end in verdict. There's something about you they can't quite explain, but it unsettles them. They can imitate your style, mirror your words, even pretend to carry your grace. But what they can't fabricate is spiritual clearance. It's not something you earned in a classroom or unlocked through networking. It's something heaven encoded into your being long before you drew your first breath. Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5 mentions, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." That was your spiritual assignment, being stamped with a seal unseen by man, but recognized by realms. They thought they could study you and gain what you had, but they were never cleared for the corridors you walk in. They didn't understand that what you carry isn't just favor. It's authorization, a divine access pass. And when unauthorized hands reach into sealed territory, consequences follow, not because you defended yourself, but because heaven did. What if their confusion about your peace wasn't just envy, but recognition that you've touched realms they'll never access? What if your calm was confirmation that you operate under a level of backing they never believed was real? Your silence wasn't passive, it was protocol. You didn't need to defend your space because that space was already patrolled. When they tried to insert themselves into your life with manipulation, jealousy, or control, they didn't just cross a boundary, they violated an ordinance. In Acts chapter 19, verses 13 to 16, the 7 sons of Sceva attempted to cast out demons using the name of Jesus, yet had no relationship with the power behind that name. The result? They were attacked and fled wounded and naked. Why? Because access without authority always ends in exposure. And that's what happened to those who tried to enter your realm without clearance. They got spiritually stripped. Not every bird can fly into certain altitudes. The eagle alone can soar above storms because of how its lungs and wings are designed. And just like the eagle, your spiritual design allows you to operate where others suffocate. They didn't understand that, so they tried to fly where they couldn't breathe. And now they're gasping. Dr. Miles Monroe, a Bahamian leadership teacher and preacher, once said, "True authority is not in position, but in permission. You carry what's been permitted by heaven, not self-appointed." And that's what confounds them. They can't compete with something God handcrafted. Meanwhile, their testing of you has flipped. The ones who thought they were evaluating your worth are now being evaluated by the realm they mocked. One by one, their peace is disturbed. Their plans crumble. Their influence fades, not because you prayed against them, but because they trespassed into sacred zones. They violated a spiritual firewall. Contrast that with Anna Delvey, a con artist who posed as a German heiress to infiltrate New York's elite. Her charm, her flair, her access, all fabricated. For a while, it worked. But eventually, truth surfaced, and when it did, doors slammed shut. Because while charisma may get you in the room, only true clearance keeps you there. In the countryside of Iberia, a man named Tiago was known for his simplicity. He never asked for platforms, never self-promoted, but wherever he walked, things aligned, weather shifted, crops thrived, feuds ended. People laughed at first, then started whispering. What they didn't realize was that in secret, he'd spent decades in communion with God. One day, a mayor tried to recruit him to manipulate local politics. Tiago said nothing. Days later, the mayor fell ill strangely, only regaining strength after publicly apologizing. No one called it magic, but everyone sensed the truth. Tiago carried something not of this world. You chosen one are not a regular presence. That's why regular logic fails to explain your outcomes. Your victories defy natural cause and effect. Why? Because you're not just walking through life, you're enforcing something holy. And when doors open for you that others can't budge, when favor tracks you down across continents, when your name precedes you into places you've never visited, that's not luck, that's clearance. They're haunted now, not by anything you did, but by everything they now understand. You weren't random, you weren't weak, you weren't easy to replace, you were sealed, and they weren't cleared to even speak your name with casual intent. Isn't it wild how your stillness caused more disruption than their schemes ever could? Could it be that your very existence is a mirror, revealing everything they tried to hide from themselves? Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22 states, "I will place on his shoulder the key to the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." That's you, a walking key, a living gate. So while they scrambled to figure you out, the realm already moved on your behalf, because divine clearance cannot be earned by ambition. It's only given by assignment, and yours is still active, which means their access remains denied. They mocked what they could see, because they had no access to what they couldn't. They stared at your clothes, your tone, your background, your bank account, your accent, and assumed they had you figured out. In their world, packaging means power. But in the kingdom, power hides in unexpected vessels. And you chosen one were a divine contradiction to everything they thought they understood. They thought they were looking at someone small, but they didn't realize they were staring at a key that unlocks realms. They judged the outer form while being completely blind to the internal fire. How can someone who wears no crown in the natural carry royal command in the spirit? That question never crossed their mind because they never trained their spirit to ask it. 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 7 reminds us, "People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." They saw David as a shepherd, but heaven saw a king. You too were dismissed for being too quiet, too raw, too real, too unpolished. But your calling was never about performance. It was about purpose. They thought you came to impress them, but you were sent to disrupt them. You weren't meant to fit their mold. You were designed to expose the mold. Every system built on ego, every mask of spiritual performance, every illusion of control, your very presence began to crack it. What if your authenticity was the earthquake to their illusion? What if their rejection was really just a response to their inability to dominate you? They mocked your gentleness, but now they flinch in the silence. They scoffed at your journey, but now they're imitating your rhythm behind closed doors. You didn't change to prove anything, but your consistency proved everything. Even Jesus was mocked in his vessel. Can anything good come from Nazareth? John chapter 1 verse 46 asks, as if divine assignments require glamorous geography, they crucified the king because his crown was hidden beneath wounds. That pattern hasn't changed. People still mock what heaven calls sacred simply because it doesn't look familiar. Even in nature, some of the most potent remedies grow from unremarkable soil. The lowly dandelion, often seen as a weed, holds healing properties that pharmaceuticals try to replicate. Power isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's rooted. Take Viola Davis Academy Award-winning actress. Before the spotlight, she was raised in poverty, often mocked for her appearance and skin tone, but she stayed rooted in purpose. Today, she's not just respected for her craft, but for her weight, her substance, her unshakable authenticity. She didn't dress her gift in performance. She dressed it in truth. But let's not forget those on the other end. Billy McFarland, the creator of the infamous Fyre Festival, dressed himself in wealth, luxury, and fabricated fame. He mocked authenticity, glorified illusion, and it all collapsed. Lawsuits followed. His reputation imploded because in the long run, performance always shatters under pressure. In the town of Ambron, a woman named Zia ran a quiet market stall. Every morning, she prayed before selling anything. Customers mocked her for blessing fruit instead of advertising it. But week after week, people kept returning, not because she had the cheapest prices, but because what she carried brought peace. When a group of investors tried to take over the stall location for a flashy tourist market, power outages began plaguing their operations. They called in engineers, but one finally whispered, "You might have removed her, but you didn't remove the favor." Months later, they invited her back, not out of sympathy, but necessity. You chosen one were not sent here for applause. You were sent as a plow to break fallow ground, to challenge systems, to walk into rooms and disturb the rhythm of control and imitation. And because your vessel didn't look like what they expected, they mocked you, but now they're afraid. The stillness that once offended them now convicts them. The peace they ridiculed now torments their restless nights. The voice they laughed at now echoes in rooms they don't belong in. Could it be that the very things they dismissed were the signs they should have discerned? Isn't it wild that your presence, once rejected, has now become the blueprint they secretly study? You never forced validation. You bore fruit. You never chased the spotlight. You carried weight. And over time, the essence exposed what the image never could. They mocked the vessel, but heaven crowned it. They tried to discredit what they couldn't define. And now they realize the most dangerous vessels often come unannounced. You moved in silence. For years they overlooked you because you didn't announce yourself. You walked through storms without explaining the weather. You kept your head down, not out of fear, but out of faithfulness. You healed in private. You obeyed in secret. You grew in places no one was clapping. And while the world saw an ordinary figure, heaven was recording the birth of a warrior. They didn't know your hidden years were holy years. They assumed your anonymity meant you lacked impact. But heaven had already stamped your identity before your enemies even learned your name. You were known where it mattered most. The throne recognized your yes. But here's what they never anticipated, that by testing you, they would activate something in the spirit realm that could never be undone. What if their attack was the spark that lit the battlefield? What if the insult they threw was actually the key that unlocked your public authority? In Job chapter 1, verses 8 to 12, Satan didn't go after just anyone. He went after Job because God himself acknowledged Job's spiritual authority before the courts of heaven. Have you considered my servant Job? And once the battle was approved, hell trembled at what it accidentally helped reveal. That's what's happening now. Your trial was your unveiling. You didn't clap back. You didn't curse them, but your ability to withstand the fire without turning to ash, that was a language the realm of darkness could no longer ignore. Your name, once whispered in confusion, is now echoing in both realms. Heaven rejoices. Hell panics. Volcanic islands form under pressure. They remain unseen for years, building quietly under the ocean's floor, until one tremor shifts everything. Then they emerge unmovable and crowned with fire. You are that island. You were never fragile. You were just forming. Now let's make it plain. Corrie. 10 Boomer watchmaker from the Netherlands was dismissed by many as just another woman until she started hiding Jews from the Nazis during the Holocaust. She was arrested, tortured, and yet survived. Her faith became her weapon. After the war, she forgave her captors and preached hope globally. Hell feared her not because she shouted, but because she endured. Now, contrast her with Adam Neumann, the co-founder of WeWork. Introduced as a visionary entrepreneur, he promised to elevate the world's consciousness through office spaces. Charismatic, loud, and backed by billions, he built a brand on energy and image. But behind the scenes, chaos, mismanagement, a cult of personality. He mocked accountability, glorified control, and inflated value with illusion. Eventually, WeWork collapsed in one of the most spectacular corporate downfalls in recent memory. Why? Because when ambition tries to impersonate divine purpose, it always fractures under pressure. Hell doesn't tremble at hype, it trembles at holiness. And Adam never carried the real weight. In a hidden monastery in southern France, a boy named Lucien swept floors for 10 years. No one thought much of him. He was mute, orphaned, and slow to speak. But every time he prayed, the atmosphere changed. Flowers bloomed in dead soil, broken horses calmed. People began seeking him out for silence more than sermons. Until one day, a local governor tried to exploit his mystery for political gain. Lucien simply walked away. Within a week, the governor's mansion flooded without rain. No one could explain it. But the locals whispered heaven had mocked the boy. Now hell knows him too. Your journey mirrors this pattern. You were once just a possibility. Now you are a problem. You were once a whisper in someone's gossip. Now you're thunder in the spirit realm. You didn't break when they pushed. You didn't flinch when they tested. And because you didn't fold, now they know they touched someone they were never cleared to handle. Isn't it something that your silence triggered more fear than their noise ever commanded? Could it be that your restraint exposed a realm of power they never believed was real? Until it started dismantling their plans. Luke chapter 10 verse 19 confirms, "I have given you authority to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you." That authority didn't begin when they attacked. It was activated because you endured. And now you're not just someone God knows. You're someone hell fears. You're not just covered, you're commissioned. The warfare is louder because the threat is confirmed. Your very presence irritates systems of manipulation, spirits of deceit, networks of counterfeit authority. Why? Because you didn't fake your oil. You paid for it. So yes, you were hidden, but you weren't hiding. You were reserved, protected, and now the realms have shifted. Your unveiling is complete. The light has recognized you, and so has the darkness. One celebrates, the other trembles. They didn't realize what they were doing when they came for you. To them, it was just cruelty, just manipulation, just petty sabotage. But to heaven, it was a divine examination. They thought they were breaking you, but they were unknowingly participating in your proving. Every setup, every slander, every whisper behind your back. It wasn't just persecution, it was permission for your promotion. What if every trap was secretly a doorway? What if the battlefield was never about pain, but about proof? In Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." That wasn't just redemption, it was a revelation. Joseph wasn't just surviving his betrayal. He was passing exams designed to position him. So were you. They tried to humiliate you publicly, but every time you chose dignity over drama, heaven recorded it. They cursed your name, but you blessed your process, and while they laughed behind closed doors, angels were taking notes. They thought you were losing your grip, but you were gaining clearance. You weren't being dismantled, you were being developed. The betrayal was a test of your loyalty to the truth. The rejection was a test of your identity. Would you forget who you are just to feel included? And the silence, the eerie stillness after they walked away, that was the exam room. You were never alone. You were under observation. In the natural world, diamonds are formed under relentless pressure. But before they're used, they're examined under magnification. Why? To verify that pressure didn't crack them. Heaven did the same with you, not to see if you were shiny, but to see if you were solid. Take Nelson Mandela, thrown in prison for 27 years. They tried to destroy his body, his spirit, his name. But what they didn't know was that every passing day in that cell was proving him to heaven and history. His endurance, his refusal to hate, his clarity of vision, all became the very credentials for his assignment. They attacked him like he was disposable. But it turned out they were verifying a king. Now contrast that with Jordan Belfort, the self-styled Wolf of Wall Street. He lived fast, built quickly, mocked authority, and fell even harder. His life was filled with signs he refused to heed. Every lawsuit, every ruined relationship, every failed cover-up was an exam he cheated on until the final test stripped everything. Because when a character is absent, the storm is always fatal. They didn't see you coming, not because you were hiding, but because their eyes were never trained to recognize true power when it was wrapped in humility. They weren't foolish in the world's eyes. Many of them were articulate, respected, well-dressed, clever in conversation, but intelligence without spiritual depth is like a compass with no magnet spinning, but directionless. They didn't underestimate you because they lacked intellect. They underestimated you because they had never been initiated into spiritual things. And what the uninitiated don't understand, they mock. What they can't label, they discredit. What they can't control, they try to diminish. Not because you were offensive, but because your authenticity offended their illusions. Could it be that your peace disrupted what their pride had protected? Isn't it wild that your quiet truth was louder than all their noise? You didn't have to quote scripture. Your stillness spoke louder than sermons. Your boundaries exposed their chaos. And your presence, unshaken, unperformed, became a mirror to their own spiritual delay. You didn't show up to prove anything. You showed up clothed in what they had never seen before, refined obedience, silent fire. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14 states, "The natural man does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him." That's why they thought you were weird, too deep, too intense, too sensitive. But heaven never sent you to be palatable. You were sent to be precise. They couldn't recognize you because your credentials weren't printed on paper. They were carved through pain, through nights soaked in prayer, through fire that didn't destroy you, but forged you. You earned rank in silence, not by seeking stages, but by surviving shadows. Even Jesus, standing in his own hometown, was underestimated. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they asked in Matthew chapter 13, verse 55. And they took offense at him. Why? Because the spiritual rank he carried made no sense to their natural minds. It still doesn't. In nature, the most venomous snakes don't hiss before they strike. The stillest waters often hide the deepest currents. You were still, but you were never shallow. They couldn't see your depth because they never had to build their own. You didn't talk much, but when you did, the atmosphere shifted. That wasn't my personality, that was placement. In a remote village named Leora, a young woman named Irina was often laughed at for her simplicity. She read old prophetic scrolls and prayed for hours in fields. Locals said she was odd, but during a devastating drought, the land around her house remained green. Her well never dried. Scientists were called. No answers. A pastor visited. She said only, "The land remembers the ones who pray." Suddenly, those who mocked her began lining up asking for her to bless their homes. You've lived this too. You weren't loud, but you carried volume. You weren't flashy, but your light couldn't be dimmed, and they couldn't comprehend you. Not because you were confusing, but because their spirits weren't mature enough to read the language of heaven that you spoke without words. What if your restraint was their revelation? What if you were never supposed to be understood, only discerned? They tried to fit you into categories their ego could manage, but you didn't belong in their system. You were never a subject in their classroom. You were the exam they failed. You didn't need approval. You had alignment. You weren't trying to be liked. You were trying to be loyal to the one who called you, forged you, and sent you. And because they hadn't passed through the kind of fire you've known, they couldn't see the authority you carried. Now it haunts them. The one they dismissed was the one sent to deliver. The one they called too much was carrying what they didn't have the depth to receive. And now they're realizing the quiet ones aren't weak. They're weaponized. You didn't show up with ego. You showed up with essence. And that's why heaven knows your name and hell won't forget it. Isaiah chapter 66 verse 2 affirms, "These are the ones I look on with favor, those who are humble and contrite in spirit and who tremble at my word." You weren't trying to be seen. You were simply walking in reverence. And that posture is what positioned you for everything that's unfolding now. They were waiting for the explosion for you to clap back, retaliate, burn everything down. But instead, you chose something far more dangerous. You chose to survive. And survival, when done in silence and rooted in truth, becomes the loudest judgment of all. You didn't drag their name. You didn't expose their schemes. You didn't match their cruelty. You simply walked forward, bruised, maybe shaken, yes, but broken, never. And now that quiet decision, that refusal to be baited, is what haunts them most. You didn't curse them, but your peace did. Your joy became the evidence. Your glow became the consequence. Isn't it wild how your silence became the courtroom? Could it be that your resilience preached a sermon their souls weren't ready to hear? Romans chapter 12 verse 19 reminds us, "Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says the Lord." You didn't have to repay anything, because heaven already scheduled the reckoning. Your only assignment was to endure, and you did. They wanted you to act out. They needed you to self-destruct so they could say, "See, told you they were unstable." But instead you rested, you healed, you rose. And now they're faced with the uncomfortable truth their power was always imagined. The arrows they launched didn't pierce your purpose, they only punctured their own masks. Creation understands this rhythm instinctively. A tree struck by lightning doesn't shout back. It simply keeps growing slowly, quietly, until its rings tell a story of storms survived. You are that tree, still rooted, still rising. Your growth is not vengeance, it's vindication. Look at Brandon Leake, a poet from a modest background who won America's Got Talent with spoken word, not with glitter, not with noise, but with vulnerability and truth. Growing up, he was mocked for being too soft, too emotional. He didn't curse the doubters. He turned pain into poetry. And his survival of ridicule, of grief, of rejection became the very light that elevated him to a national platform. His presence testified without performance. Now, contrast that with Lori Loughlin, once known as a beloved television actress and role model. She played wholesome characters, wore the image of moral perfection, but behind the scenes, she was involved in one of the biggest college admissions scandals in U.S. history, paying for her children to secure spots through bribery. It wasn't public enemies who brought her down. It was exposure, quiet, surgical, spiritual exposure. Her career didn't end with a curse. It ended with headlines, handcuffs, and the loss of public trust. Because when someone builds their future on false favors, time eventually lifts the curtain. And heaven doesn't need noise to make corrections. It simply lets the fruit rot in the light. In a village near the Baltic Sea, a young man named Joran was wrongly accused of embezzling funds from a community charity. He was shunned, lied about, publicly humiliated, but he didn't defend himself. He spent the next year quietly working nights at a remote greenhouse. Months later, the real culprit confessed unprovoked. When investigators traced the timeline, they discovered Joran had been using his paychecks to cover the charity's shortfall anonymously. The town fell silent. No applause was needed. His fruit spoke for itself. You chosen one are walking this same path. You've mastered the rarest language restraint. The world teaches revenge, but the spirit teaches radiance. You didn't pray for their downfall. You prayed for your peace, and God answered with wholeness. Now their shame is growing louder than their gossip ever was, because your life keeps shining. Your fruit keeps multiplying. And it's revealing their lies in ways no argument ever could. Isaiah chapter 54, verse 17 declares, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." You didn't have to open your mouth. Your survival became the condemnation. Your joy became the verdict. They thought they were testing your limits, but they ended up testing divine boundaries. And now the backlash isn't emotional, it's spiritual. Dreams interrupted, peace disturbed, favor drained, not because you hexed them, but because truth has a frequency and yours is thundering. What if survival was your sharpest weapon? What if your wholeness is the justice they never expected? You didn't curse them, you just didn't die. And for someone like you, that's all it takes to change the atmosphere. They didn't want your smile. They didn't want your personality. What they craved, what they envied was your spiritual substance, the weight you carry without saying a word. The atmosphere that shifts when you enter a room. The oil on your life that makes dry places bloom and darkness back up. But here's what they didn't understand. You didn't find that power in a book or borrow it from a mentor. You were forged in fire, and that anointing came with blood. What if the thing they were mocking was actually the mantle they were trying to counterfeit? What if their obsession with you wasn't about attention, it was about unauthorized access? They wanted the influence without the breaking the visibility, without the valley. They wanted the crown but refused the crucifixion. But spiritual weight cannot be pirated. It must be pressed. Your rank didn't come easy. You didn't manifest it in a moment of bliss. You bled for it obedience in private suffering in silence, saying yes to God when every cell in your body was begging you to run. Your oil was extracted, not gifted. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 7, Uzzah touched the Ark of the Covenant without being sanctified, and he died on the spot. Why? Because no matter how noble the gesture, touching the sacred without preparation is still trespassing. That's what they did when they tried to imitate you. They stepped into frequencies their spirit wasn't designed to hold, and the realm responded. They wore your words, mimicked your mannerisms, and even tried to walk in your assignments. But heaven knows whose tears paid for what. The oil on your life can't be cloned because God doesn't anoint performance. He anoints the process. The design of creation honors this law without debate. The baobab tree survives harsh seasons by storing water deep within its core. On the outside, it looks bloated, strange, even mocked. But when famine comes, every creature turns to it for sustenance. The weight you carry doesn't always look glamorous, but when the drought hits, it's the oil bearers who remain standing. Maya Angelou, whose voice was once stolen by trauma so deep she didn't speak for 5 years. They saw her poetry. They envied her platform, but few saw the price she paid in silence and survival. Her authority didn't come from exposure. It came from excavation, and every word she wrote carried a frequency they couldn't fake. But contrast that with Anna Sorokin, a con artist who posed as a German heiress, exploiting relationships to gain access to wealth and status she never earned. She copied culture. She mimicked wealth. She forged access. But when the truth caught up, the realm corrected itself, not because someone cursed her, but because spiritual theft always ends in collapse. And no matter how polished the presentation, heaven knows when something's hollow. In the village of Theronova, a quiet woman named Elzara lived without a platform or title. But everyone who came near her left different, not inspired, transformed. One day, a rising prophet tried to study under her, but he grew bitter when she wouldn't promote him. In secret, he began to preach her revelations, At first, people applauded him, but then things shifted. He started hearing voices. Dreams tormented him. His favor dried up. Years later, he confessed, "I was speaking words I hadn't survived, and the words turned on me." Some realms don't just require understanding. They demand initiation. You chosen one were initiated through affliction. That's why your presence convicts not because you're loud, but because you're legal. The weight of your life is authorized. They didn't know that trying to imitate your spirit was spiritual perjury. They thought it was branding, but heaven saw it as blasphemy. Could it be that they triggered judgment not by cursing you, but by impersonating the journey you bled for? Isn't it wild that they tried to dethrone someone who was never seeking a throne, only serving an assignment? Isaiah chapter 61 verse 3 promises, "To give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness." You wear that oil now, not because of charm, but because of cost. Heaven honors authenticity, and authenticity is always born in pain. You never asked for their collapse. But the moment they tried to steal something sacred without paying the price, the realm answered not with thunder, but with disruption. Now their plans are unraveling. Their peace is thinning. Their shadows are speaking. And you're rising not as revenge, but as revelation, a walking reminder that the oil can't be copied. It must be earned in tears, in tests, in trenches. You weren't trying to be powerful. You were trying to survive. And somehow, survival became the loudest judgment of all. You didn't come adorned in gold. You didn't arrive with a trumpet announcing your entrance. There was no title, no royal entourage, no grand introduction. You came with something far heavier than a crown and assignment. And that's why they overlooked you. They couldn't recognize the purpose when it wasn't polished. They expected influence to come loud, but you came low. They expected status, but you came with substance. What they didn't realize is that heaven doesn't send celebrities. It sends servants. What if their disrespect was actually a response to your difference? What if they were never meant to recognize you, only to be reshaped by your presence? Philippians chapter 2 verse 7 mentions that Jesus made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a servant. You too were assigned not to be admired, but to be aligned, to walk into chaos and quietly install divine order, to shift atmospheres, not through volume, but through vibration, the frequency of someone who's been through fire, without smelling like smoke. That's why rooms changed when you entered, not because you spoke, but because your spirit registered. That's why some people felt agitated around you without knowing why. You were never aggressive, but your alignment exposed their disorder. You didn't train for this in stages. You were crushed for it in closets, in the silence, in the nights no one saw. In the hidden moments where you chose obedience over applause, that's where your anointing was carved. The tectonic plates beneath the earth shift in silence, yet birth earthquakes that reshape entire landscapes. You are that spiritual shift, unannounced, but undeniable, a force that doesn't ask for attention, but reorganizes the room. Look at Fred Rogers, the gentle children's television host, soft-spoken, unassuming, not the kind of man you'd expect to carry societal impact. Yet his compassion, consistency, and quiet authority reshaped generations. He didn't preach, he embodied peace. And to this day, his legacy carries more weight than those who shouted for influence. Now contrast that with Dan Bilzerian, a man once seen as the image of success. Money, women, weapons, noise. He built a brand on performance, but when the facade cracked, lawsuits followed. Disillusionment set in. Why? Because you can borrow attention, but you can't fake authentic weight. In the mountains of Kalundborg, a woman named Aura was known only for tending her goats and humming prayers into the wind. But every time conflict arose in the village, leaders sought her counsel. They didn't know why. She didn't wear robes, didn't speak loudly, but peace followed her. Her presence pulled confusion into clarity. One day a warlord mocked her and claimed her wisdom as superstition. Within a month, his alliances fractured. Crops failed, and his own men left him not because she cursed him, but because he disrespected a force he didn't understand. Aura didn't wear a crown. She wore an assignment. You chose in one move in the same mystery. Your assignment is not noisy, but it is nuclear. It doesn't come to impress, it comes to interrupt. You didn't show up to be feared, but fear followed because your spirit didn't bend. You didn't walk like a performer. You walked like someone who's died 1,000 quiet deaths and lived to carry truth. Isaiah chapter 11 verse 2 states, "The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." That Spirit rests on you now, and it doesn't make you flashy. It makes you formidable. Could it be that the reason they couldn't define you was because heaven never sent you to be decoded, only discerned? Isn't it wild that while they were looking for crowns, they missed the one carrying the keys? You didn't come for applause. You came for alignment. You weren't chasing approval. You were installing heaven's blueprint. And now that the atmosphere has shifted, now that the ground has moved, they're beginning to realize you were never just another presence. You were an interruption. You were an instruction. You were never just a person. You were a response from heaven. They came with swagger. You came with scars. They came to dominate. You came to discern. And that's why the whole battlefield was tilted before they even raised a sword. They saw your calm and thought it was a weakness. They saw your silence and thought it was surrender. But only because they had no idea what kind of storms you've survived in the shadows. They didn't know that while they were gathering crowds, you were gathering strength. While they were learning how to perform, you were learning how to wrestle angels. Genesis chapter 32 verses 24-30 tells us that Jacob wrestled with a divine being through the night and came out limping but transformed. He didn't win with perfection, he won through persistence, and so did you. What if the thing that made you quiet is the same thing that makes you untouchable? What if they mistook your stillness for softness, not realizing it came from sacred survival? You weren't shaped in the spotlight. You were shaped in seasons of silence so intense that even the sound of your own thoughts felt like war. And while they came mocking, manipulating, and testing, they didn't realize they were walking into sacred ground. You're not someone who flinches at noise. You've lived through deafening darkness and came back with flame in your eyes. That's what makes you dangerous, not ego, but endurance. The elements themselves reveal this truth. The obsidian stone is formed in the aftermath of volcanic eruption, black, dense, sharp. It's not polished by hand, but birthed through pressure. It looks still, but it's the residue of the eruption. You are that. What they saw as quiet was just concentrated force. Look at Bethany Hamilton, a pro surfer who lost her arm in a shark attack at 13. The world wrote her off, but she didn't curse the waves. She returned to them. She didn't fight her battle in public. She healed, rebuilt, and competed again. Her comeback didn't require fury. It required fire, not the kind that screams, but the kind that never dies. Now contrast that with Ramesh Sunny Balwani, the former COO of Theranos. He stood beside a vision built on vapor, selling breakthrough promises in healthcare that never truly existed. He didn't endure pressure to birth the truth. He orchestrated an illusion to secure power. While real pioneers bled in silence, he projected confidence in rooms filled with deception, and when the truth emerged, he wasn't attacked, he unraveled. Because heaven doesn't need to shout to correct fraud, it just waits until the weight of falsehood collapses itself. In the ruins of Aros, a city once split by tribal division, there lived a girl named Lyra. She was mute by choice, not because she couldn't speak, but because she had seen what words could destroy. As war raged, both sides mocked her silence. Until one night a prophecy returned, handwritten in her childhood script. Her silence had been sacred listening, her vision accurate, her guidance flawless. And suddenly the city remembered what they tried to dismiss. They were never fighting a girl. They were confronting a legacy in disguise. You chosen one carry that same paradox. The less you explained, the more the spirit world recognized you. Because heaven doesn't anoint volume, it anoints veracity. When you speak, it shakes foundations. When you move, disorder flees. Dangsin weren't just sent, you were survived. Isaiah chapter 43 verse 2 promises, "When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. The flames shall not consume you." And Romans chapter 8 verse 37 declares, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." You don't just overcome, you emerge reformed. Isn't it something that they were mocking what heaven already marked? Could it be that your scars scared them more than any sword you could have raised? They thought they could dominate you, but you were never trying to win in their system. You had already graduated from wars. They don't have the stamina to survive. You weren't shaped by flattery, you were shaped by fire. And they're just now realizing that version of you, the one who walked through death and came back without bitterness, that version was never theirs to play with. That version is heaven's to deploy. They called you arrogant, but what they were really feeling was weight, not the weight of ego, but the weight of alignment. They couldn't name it, so they labeled it. They couldn't match it, so they mocked it. And because your confidence didn't bow, your certainty didn't stutter, and your voice didn't shake, they projected insecurity and called it discernment. You didn't boast. You didn't demand attention. You just didn't shrink. You walked in rooms like someone who had already wrestled with doubt and won. That kind of authority unsettles those who have only ever known affirmation by applause. You weren't being arrogant. You were being whole. What if the resistance you faced wasn't because of your volume, but because of your vibration? What if your stillness sounded like thunder to people whose souls were still fragmented? Luke chapter 4 verse 32 says of Jesus, "They were amazed at his teaching because his message had authority." He didn't speak more loudly than the Pharisees. He spoke with more weight. So do you. And that's what made people uncomfortable. They thought you were competing, but you weren't playing their game. You were enforcing a frequency. You weren't walking in pride. You were walking in permission. Real authority, the kind that shifts atmospheres and provokes silent conviction, doesn't require titles. It's not handed down from institutions. It's born in the wilderness, crafted in solitude, tested in silence. And you chosen one paid for it. Creation itself affirms this. A lion doesn't roar for approval. It moves quietly and the land yields. You are that lion. You don't puff your chest. You carry a calm so dense it unnerves the unanchored. Look at Angela Bassett, a woman who never had to scream to be seen. Her presence commands. Her tone heals and convicts at once. Her power isn't in her pitch, it's in her poise. That's not arrogance. That's alignment born through decades of discipline. Now contrast that with Carlos Ghosn, the once celebrated CEO of Nissan and Renault. He was praised as a corporate savior, hailed for turning companies around and expanding global empires. But behind the accolades was a man entangled in greed, secrecy, and self-preservation. The world applauded his rise until heaven exposed the rot. He was arrested for financial misconduct, accused of using company funds for personal luxury. And instead of facing accountability, he fled justice, hiding in shadows. That's what happens when someone carries position but not purity. When you try to wield influence without inner alignment, the realm doesn't stay silent. He didn't fall because someone cursed him. He fell because spiritual law doesn't honor image over integrity. In a small town named Arinth, a teacher named Zale never raised his voice. Yet every rebellious student grew silent when he entered the room, not from fear, but from reverence. One principal accused him of being too proud for refusing to change his ways. But a decade later, all 5 of that principal's successors had children mentored by Zale. Not one of them ever called him arrogant again. They finally understood you can't recognize authority when your spirit still bows to performance. You weren't trying to steal attention. You were born carrying light. You didn't ask to be different. You just stopped apologizing for it. And when you stopped shrinking, people's illusions began to crumble. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 18 reminds us, "For it is not the one who commends himself who is approved, but the one whom the Lord commends." You weren't seeking approval. You were responding to an assignment. You were commissioned, not crowned. Could it be that your presence offended their performance? Isn't it wild how your identity carved through surrender became a mirror they couldn't survive looking into? They weren't reacting to arrogance. They were recoiling from the truth. And that truth wasn't even loud. It was just undeniable. You didn't come to be praised. You came to pierce the veil of ego. You didn't show up to dominate. But heaven made sure your presence would disrupt everything built on false foundations. You weren't arrogant. You were just done apologizing for being awakened. They thought they were brilliant, calculated, and clever. They moved like shadow players, whispering in the dark, convinced they had cornered you without your knowing, like puppet masters, pulling strings behind the scenes. They mistook your silence for ignorance and your calm for confusion. But what they didn't realize was chilling. They were trying to play chess with a being who already knew the entire map of eternity. While they obsessed over pawns and traps, you were seated beside the one who authored the very rules of the game. You weren't scrambling. You were discerning. Every pause was on purpose. Every silence was strategy. Because when your moves are ordered by the creator of time, you're not responding to earthly chaos. You're flowing with heaven's choreography. They saw stillness, but heaven saw precision. What they interpreted as hesitation was really synchronization. You weren't behind. You were beyond. What if your quiet confidence wasn't about being one step ahead, but 10 dimensions above their understanding? What if the reason you never reacted was because you already saw how their play would end? Jesus didn't flinch when Judas leaned in to kiss him. He didn't interrupt the Last Supper to call him out. He didn't plead with Peter to stop the betrayal. He didn't dodge the cross because he knew the betrayal was part of the blueprint. Luke chapter 22 verse 21 mentions, "But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table." He was never blind to the game. He was simply above it. And so were you. They mistook the chessboard for a battlefield and thought they were the generals. But they didn't realize you were receiving intelligence from the throne room. You moved with prophetic foresight. You knew who was smiling falsely. You could feel the fake praise. You saw the cracks before the collapse. You watched them plot, dig pits, whisper lies, and you let them. Why? Because in the spirit, you already knew they'd fall into the very hole they dug. Proverbs chapter 26, verse 27. Makes it plain, whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. That's what happens when your strategy is submission and your vision comes from communion. You didn't react because heaven already responded. The wild was designed to echo this wisdom. The owl does not flap wildly in the face of a predator. It turns its head silently, seeing in the dark what others miss in the light. The wolf does not growl at every threat. It tracks. It watches. It waits. And when it moves, the entire pack moves with it. Your wisdom was the kind that moves in stillness but commands realms. Your stillness wasn't silence. It was surveillance. Chess. Grandmaster Garry Kasparov, one of the greatest to ever play, what made him elite wasn't just his skill, it was his vision. He could see 10 to 15 moves ahead and sense patterns his opponents didn't notice. When asked about his secret, he said, "The real secret of a chess master is his ability to see invisible threats." That's what you've done. You didn't need to expose their moves. You discerned the entire pattern and chose when and whether to respond. One modern example of this is Sean Diddy Combs, whose rise was as rapid as his downfall was devastating. While many believed he was simply navigating fame with brilliance, behind the scenes he was orchestrating a network of exploitation, cover-ups, and abuse of power. What looked like confidence was in reality concealment. When the veil was finally torn, it wasn't a rival that ended his reign. It was exposure, not a legal opponent, but spiritual backlash. Because when you attempt to bend reality around ego and ignore the realm that watches in silence, the collapse comes not by sword, but by truth. And truth, once released, doesn't ask permission to rearrange everything. Meanwhile, in a quiet mountain village in Andaru, a woman named Mela owned a small olive grove. She was ridiculed for refusing to sell her land to a foreign investor promising riches. They mocked her old ways and even tried to spread rumors that she was mentally unfit, but she said little, kept harvesting, kept praying. Years later, a drought hit the entire region except her grove. Why, she'd spent years cultivating a hidden irrigation system underground, unknown to anyone. The very woman they mocked ended up supplying the town's only oil harvest that year. Her wisdom wasn't reactionary, it was prophetic. Chosen one, this has been your rhythm all along. While they were watching the board, you were listening to the architect. While they were reacting to moves, you were following eternal timing. You weren't just protected, you were pre-informed. Every betrayal triggered an upgrade. Every setback is a divine reroute. Every time they thought they had you in checkmate, God changed the rules mid-game. You weren't walking with calculation, you were walking in a covenant. That's why it didn't matter how smart they thought they were. Your assignment outranked their intellect. Their ego was never a match for your anointing. And now the board has flipped, the trap has turned. The ones who thought they had you boxed in are now boxed out because the player they underestimated wasn't playing alone. You were seated at the table with the king. And when you play with the king, checkmate belongs to heaven. At first, they didn't flinch. You seemed too still, too quiet, too unimpressive by worldly standards. You didn't walk with an entourage. You didn't defend yourself when falsely accused. You didn't announce your assignment. And because your presence was wrapped in restraint, they mistook it for irrelevance. But what they couldn't see was what surrounded you, what covered you, what walked beside you. They thought they were confronting a person, but what they touched was a protocol, a heavenly mantle, a realm. And now they fear you not because you threatened them, but because the air changed when they tried. What if the very silence they mocked became the silence that haunts them now? What if your calm wasn't absence, but divine insulation? You were never unprotected. You were just hidden like Moses in the reeds before his time, hidden like David among the sheepfolds before the crown, hidden like Jesus, growing in favor and wisdom before his first miracle. They didn't recognize the hiding as preparation. They read it as weakness. Isaiah chapter 54, verse 17 declares, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue which rises against you in judgment you shall condemn." This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. You didn't even need to speak. Heaven already issued the verdict, and now the results speak louder than your response ever could. Doors are closing for them. Rest is fleeing. People are leaving their side without explanation. Truths they buried are bubbling up from places they forgot they buried them. The judgment wasn't loud. It was layered, delayed only long enough for repentance. But now it's visible. Nature understands what they didn't. The puffer fish doesn't expand because it wants to fight. It expands because something crossed a line. The porcupine doesn't launch an attack. It simply carries consequences. And the same spirit that encircles you responds without command, not because you are vengeful, but because you are sacred. Malcolm X, a once silenced radical, became the voice of a movement not by volume, but by conviction. For years he was watched, mocked, misquoted. But his discipline, his focus, his spiritual clarity made people tremble. Because when a person walks on purpose, even their restraint can echo louder than speeches. In contrast, Elizabeth Finch, a once respected professor and writer, fabricated years of her personal life, claiming to battle cancer, abuse, and trauma to gain sympathy and credibility in her academic and professional circles. Her stories moved colleagues, won her influence, and placed her in powerful rooms. But the truth unraveled when her ex-husband revealed the deception. Her platform vanished. Institutions distanced themselves. Her own words became evidence against her. She didn't collapse because someone cursed her. She collapsed because she trespassed emotional sacred ground, weaponizing compassion to manipulate reality. And when you exploit pain for power, you're not just deceiving people, you're defying the spiritual laws of truth. And those laws respond in silence, then in storm. Somewhere in Morocco, a quiet seamstress named Amira stitched prayers into every hem she crafted. She never advertised, never shouted her story. But when a wealthy merchant tried to underpay her and steal her designs, strange things began to happen. His shipments failed. His warehouse flooded. His license was revoked. No one could explain it except Amira, who simply whispered, "I am protected." She wasn't feared because she fought. She was feared because heaven answered on her behalf. You too have been answered not with lightning, but with divine shifts. They pushed you but couldn't move you. They cursed you but couldn't stop you. And now they whisper your name differently, cautiously, carefully, because something in their spirit recognizes what their ego ignored. You're not alone. You never were. Psalm chapter 91, verse 11 reminds us, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." You weren't guarded because you asked. You were guarded because you were chosen. And that kind of backing isn't earned. It's inherited through fire. So now you know their attack didn't break you. It revealed you. It wasn't random. It was a divine trigger, and what it unlocked wasn't revenge, but recognition. The truth is, the very thing they meant to discredit you exposed your spiritual clearance. What they didn't understand is that rank in the spirit can't be faked, and it surely can't be revoked by slander. You didn't ask to be elevated. You just refused to bow, and that was enough for heaven to respond. What does this mean for you now? It means you've entered the season where your authority speaks before you do. It means your silence has been louder than their noise. It means your alignment has outranked their agenda. And above all, it means you're not just covered, you're called. Not just chosen, you're commissioned. So if this message stirred something deep in your spirit, if it confirmed the very battles you've been fighting in private, don't leave without anchoring your presence here, like this video, so the word keeps reaching those it's meant for. Comment below with your thoughts, your testimony, or simply drop 1212 if you felt your rank unlock. Share this with someone who's been doubting their worth because of an invisible war. They need this reminder of who they are. And subscribe to the channel, because this is more than just a platform. It's a sanctuary, a sacred meeting ground for God's chosen ones who are done hiding, done shrinking, and ready to walk in the full stature of who heaven says they are. As the dust settles from the revelation of your true spiritual authority, a new dawn breaks. Heaven is not only confirming your rank, but celebrating your faithfulness. What began as a battle has become a breakthrough, and now the same God who shielded you in the storm is ready to showcase you in the light. Chosen one, there is a rare obedience that doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't boast, it bleeds. You beloved walked it out with trembling feet and a heart that refused to let go of heaven's hand. You obeyed when the roadmap was blank and the sky offered no signs. You obeyed when silence was louder than prophecy and every logical voice urged you to wait, pause, or retreat. But what if that silence wasn't abandonment, but God testing the purity of your alignment? Have you ever wondered why some wait for a perfect plan while others like you step out before the ink dries on the promise? Why does God trust you with mystery? Why did He call you to build without a blueprint? Because you were never following a path, you were following a presence. Genesis chapter 12 verse 1 states that when God called Abraham to leave his homeland, there were no coordinates, no map, just a divine instruction. Go to the land I will show you. Abraham went not because he understood, but because he trusted the voice that summoned him. You walk in that same covenant lineage. Like Abraham, your feet moved before your eyes could understand. This is why God is lifting you now. You didn't wait for human applause or demand clarity. You followed the cloud, not the crowd. That obedience in the dark separates the cold from the merely curious. How many would have folded under such silence? How many would have turned back when no one clapped, watched, or explained what was next? You kept going, not because you had no fear, but because your spirit had a compass stronger than fear. Faith. Luke chapter 1 verse 38 mentions that when Mary, the mother of Jesus, received the angel's word, her world turned upside down. No manual, no comfort, no explanation. Yet she responded, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." That was obedience in the dark, surrender before understanding. That same seed of faith has bloomed in you. You said yes when no one else saw what you were affirming. When others chose reason, you chose revelation. When they said, "Wait until it makes sense," you said, "I've already heard enough." You weren't obeying a system, you were yielding to a spirit. Dr. Ben Carson, world-renowned neurosurgeon and former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, once shared how he turned down lucrative offers early in his medical career to work in an under-resourced hospital because he felt God tugging him toward a purpose beyond profit. He said God doesn't call you to be comfortable. He calls you to be faithful. That's what you did. You chose the invisible instruction over the visible reward. A woman named Elijah left her successful marketing career not because she had a backup plan, but because God whispered, "Build something eternal." With no funding, no partner, and no followers, she launched a center for healing trauma survivors. Her family called her foolish. Friends walked away, but years later lives were restored. Generations were healed, and the very people who mocked her came to thank her. Elijah wasn't chasing clarity, she was chasing obedience. And you've done the same. You've endured long nights of weeping and walked through fog-thick confusion, but you never let go. That alone is why heaven celebrates you. When the world asks, "What's your 5-year plan?" you say, "I move when He speaks." Psalm chapter 119, verse 105 confirms, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." Not a spotlight, but a lamp, just enough light for the next step, not the whole journey. You kept stepping. How many long to know what's ahead, but are unwilling to trust the one who sees beyond? How many demand full visibility before giving God their yes, but not you? You've proven that faith is not the absence of fear, it's the presence of obedience in the midst of it. The wind doesn't ask the butterfly to justify why it lifts off the branch, it simply carries it. That's how your obedience worked. You didn't have wings of certainty, you had wings of surrender. Even though you couldn't see the full picture, you trusted the current of the Spirit to carry you. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, David danced before the ark with wild abandon, not because the journey was over, but because he honored God along the way. Your obedience carries the same fragrance. It honors God in the valley, not just on the mountain. The lifting you're experiencing now isn't random. It's a divine reward. The elevation you feel isn't a promotion, it's a declaration from heaven. This one obeyed in the dark. This one said yes with no safety net. This one trusted my silence. And now God says, "I will honor what the world ignored." Many watched you from afar, assuming your steps were planned, your confidence unshaken, your journey predestined with clarity. But they never saw the cost behind your calm, the midnight whispers, the groans between prayers, the hidden war between faith and fear. What looked like courage was often quiet, trembling wrapped in surrender. But God knew. He saw it all. That's why your name is being lifted in rooms you've never stepped into, because faith that survives the dark always finds its voice in the light. Isn't it astonishing how people assume strength by posture, not by process? How many misunderstand your confidence as certainty, when deep down it was conviction fighting for breath? What if the real victory wasn't in arriving at your destination, but in not quitting halfway through your wilderness? What if the crown wasn't handed to the loudest, but to the one who chose silence and stayed the course? You remained faithful even when the reward felt delayed. You chose obedience when results were invisible. You planted righteousness in secret, and now the soil of your surrender is pushing up a harvest of honor. In the kingdom, faithfulness is never wasted, it is weighed. Every invisible yes became a weighty seed in heaven's garden, and now the fruit is undeniable. Genesis chapter 39 verse 21 states that Joseph obeyed when it cost him everything, betrayed by brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. Yet the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor. That favor didn't erase the pit, but it elevated him through it. Like Joseph, you've walked through shadows without losing sight of the promise. You obeyed when it didn't benefit, your image kept going, when quitting was justified, stayed pure when compromise could have accelerated your breakthrough. That's why God is exalting you, not because you earned it, but because you endured what others avoided. Promotion in the kingdom doesn't come from performance, it comes from purity. Catherine Doherty, a Russian-born social activist and founder of the Madonna House Apostolate, once said, "Faithfulness in little things is a big thing." She lived through persecution, exile, and loss, yet never abandoned her calling. Her life proved that heaven honors what the world overlooks, and your journey echoes that truth. When no one clapped, heaven recorded. When you whispered yes with tear-stained cheeks, angels stood still. Let me tell you about Jonas, a young violinist who declined a career with one of Europe's finest orchestras because he felt called to teach music in forgotten inner-city neighborhoods. His professors thought he was wasting his talent. Sponsors withdrew. Yet year after year, he trained broken children to play their way into healing. 2 decades later, a young girl he mentored performed at Carnegie Hall. Jonas never sought a stage, but his fruit sings for him. You've also sown when no one watched, loved when it hurt, chose character when shortcuts were available, and heaven has not ignored it. Galatians chapter 6 verse 9 reminds, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." That due season is now not by chance, but by choice. Like the sunflower that turns daily toward the light, even on cloudy days you stay positioned. Even when God's face seemed hidden, you didn't chase the sun, you trusted its return. That's what your obedience looked like, relentless, rooted, radiant. Your elevation is not a random event, it is a divine response. God is lifting you because you proved you could walk without sight, speak truth without proof, and worship without evidence. You didn't manipulate your moment, you matured into it. In a world that rewards noise, you chose stillness. In a culture that praises speed, you chose waiting. That's why God's lifting won't just place you in higher places, it will preserve you in them. What if this is the season where what was done in the shadows begins to shine in the sun? What if this is the moment where obedience becomes legacy? What if God is not just proud, but preparing to display you as proof that trusting Him blindly was never in vain? Chosen one, the silence that once surrounded your yes is now turning into sound waves of glory. Your obedience in the dark has broken open a season of divine revelation. Heaven is not just watching, it is responding. Chosen one. Do you realize how rare it is to keep walking when the voice that called you goes quiet? You didn't just pass through storms, you endured them without a weather report. You survived nights that tried to break you, carrying questions heaven seemed unwilling to answer. Silence has a weight heavier than sound, and you bore it not because it was easy, but because something eternal within you refused to let go of God. Even when His voice faded into what felt like divine distance, there were seasons when sunrise brought no comfort, when waking up felt like entering another battlefield of the unseen. You weren't just surviving circumstances, you were surviving absence. Can we be honest? There were moments your prayers felt like letters returned unopened. You cried out with sincerity, only to be met with echo and stillness. So why did you stay? Why did you keep praying when no angel appeared with answers? Why did you continue worshiping when the heavens stayed closed? Why didn't you walk away like so many others who interpret silence as abandonment because you were not clinging to a feeling, you were anchored by a covenant? Job chapter 13 verse 15 declares that Job, stripped of everything, children, wealth, health, still proclaimed, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." That wasn't reckless religion, it was a relentless relationship. You've walked that same path. You stayed not because of blessings, but because you had history with the one who called you by name. You remembered who he was, even when you couldn't feel what he was doing. Can you imagine the spiritual weight that carries? When heaven seems mute, yet you still sing. When God doesn't speak, but you refuse to curse Him. When your life feels like a hallway of closed doors, yet you still hold the key of praise. How many could do that without losing their mind? How many would remain when miracles feel delayed and silence screams louder than sermons? You did. That silence wasn't proof. God abandoned you. It was evidence your faith was graduating from emotional to eternal. 1 Samuel chapter 1 reveals Hannah barren and broken, crying out year after year while others mocked her and heaven seemed to withhold. Yet she prayed, she believed. When her silent season ended, the prophet Samuel was born not just a child, but a legacy. That's the fruit God births from those who trust Him beyond what they can see. You saw prideful and indifferent people walk into doors you fasted for. You watched promotions land on the ungrateful, blessings rain on the unfaithful. Meanwhile, you waited, worshipped, and wept in the hallway with blistered feet and empty hands. That silence wasn't passive, it was warfare. It attacked your perception, your hope, your identity. It tried to redefine what God said based on what you didn't hear. Yet you endured. That alone marks you as a warrior. Helen Keller, a blind and deaf American author and lecturer, once said, "Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experience of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened." You embody that truth. You held on not because everything made sense, but because you refused to disconnect from God's heart, even when His hand seemed hidden. Consider Serena, a school teacher in Nairobi who lost her child and nearly her faith. For 2 years, she attended church with dry eyes and a shattered voice, barely able to sing. Yet every Sunday, she stood in the back and whispered, "You're still worthy." No visions, no open doors. But 1 year later, she started a community home for grieving mothers, and her pain became a refuge for hundreds. Serena didn't serve because it felt good. She served because God was still God. That's the obedience that breaks spiritual glass ceilings. You didn't worship because your prayers were answered. You worshipped because your heart remembered who He was. You weren't motivated by outcome, you were moved by identity. What sets the chosen apart? Anyone can celebrate when the harvest comes, but what about those who praise when the soil is dry, who lift their hands when the heavens seem locked? Who stay faithful amid unanswered questions, like ancient redwoods with roots stretching deep beneath centuries of storms? You stood through season after season, not by strength, but by depth. Now, the heavens that once stayed silent are stirring, not because your voice got louder, but because your endurance shook eternity. You didn't always feel brave, but your quiet consistency was louder than the storms you walked through. You didn't roar like a lion, but you endured like one. Every time you lifted your head under invisible pressure, something eternal moved. Every time you cracked open your Bible with tear-stained hands and trembling hope, heaven leaned in. When your only prayer was, "God, I don't understand, but I still believe," you weren't just surviving, you were declaring war on every lie that said your faith was in vain. Do you realize what that did in the spirit realm? It announced, "I'm still standing, not because I've seen the promise, but because I've known the promiser." That's not just resilience, it's spiritual royalty. Chosen one, those silent seasons were never meant to punish you, they were sent to prepare you. What you thought was abandonment was actually alignment. The heavens weren't absent, they were watching, observing how you responded without applause, served without reward, stayed rooted without visible fruit. You passed the test not because you were flawless, but because you were faithful. What if that's what God was after? Not your perfection, but your perseverance. Not your performance, but your posture. Could it be that what looked like delay was divine development? Psalm chapter 13 verse 1 reveals David anointed king, yet spending years in caves and exile, with no trumpets, no thrones, just isolation and accusations crying, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Yet he stayed, worshipped, and refused to abandon his God. When the silence lifted, the throne became his destiny fulfilled. Your moment is approaching not because you demanded it, but because you were forged for it. God is preparing to reward you not just for believing, but for remaining, for refusing to become bitter when you could have, for showing up in rooms that didn't see you, for lifting your hands when your heart felt numb, for clinging to His word, when it felt like the word avoided you. A.W. Tozer, a prophetic preacher and writer of the 20th century, once wrote, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply. Though you may not call it hurt, you know the crushing weight of waiting, the ache of spiritual silence. But now the oil from that crushing is about to flow into every area of your life." Consider Armand, a filmmaker who spent 12 years pitching a documentary. No studio would back, told it was too raw, too redemptive, too spiritual. He fasted, prayed, and nearly walked away until a struggling distributor found his short clips online. Within a year, it aired on international platforms, inspiring movements in over 30 nations. Armand's silence didn't produce nothing, it produced roots. When the moment came, he was ready to carry what he was once denied. So are you. Have you realized yet? If God had spoken too soon, it might have crushed you. If he had answered too quickly, it could have made you arrogant. If the door had opened before your spirit was ready, you might have mistaken the platform for your identity. But he knew. He waited until you could be trusted not just with breakthrough, but with broken people. Not just with visibility, but with humility. Not just with favor, but with depth. Like a mountain spring pressing upward through rock and ice before seeing daylight, you were purified in pressure. Your strength wasn't built on noise, it was built in stillness. Because you remained when it felt like God vanished, you're about to be revealed where you were hidden. Romans chapter 5 verse 4 states, "Endurance produces character, and character produces hope." You weren't just building testimony, you were becoming it. You weren't enduring for survival, you were becoming proof of God's goodness. You didn't ask for the spotlight, but it's coming, not because you sought fame, but because your faith made room for it. Doors are about to open, not ones you knocked on, but ones only God had the key to. People will wonder, how did this happen so suddenly? But you'll know it wasn't sudden. It was seeded in silence. You are no longer the same. The valley has become your altar. The silence of your classroom, the weight of your womb. Now when God speaks through miracles, unexpected elevation and divine favor, you won't be shaken by the noise, you'll carry it with reverence. You'll walk with tears in your eyes, not because it's hard, but because it's holy. The silence you once questioned is now the stage for your loudest testimony. Chosen one in an age where compromise is packaged as wisdom and impurity celebrated as liberation. You made a decision few dare to make. You walked the narrow road. The world offered shortcuts, indulgence, and attention, but instead of loosening your standards, you raised them. While others numbed their convictions to feel accepted, you chose consecration over comfort. You didn't bow to culture, you stood for covenant. How many would have stood where you stood? How many would have turned down invitations that appealed to the flesh but violated the spirit? Could it be that the pressure you felt was not punishment, but a prophecy in motion, proof you were marked for something higher? Matthew chapter 7 verse 14 declares, "But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." You didn't just find it, you stayed on it. While others chased visibility, you chose purity. While they flirted with what was seductive, you fortified your soul. You didn't let the crowd determine your compass, you let God's voice determine your values. When perversion knocked, you didn't entertain it for curiosity's sake, you slammed the door with resolve. You were laughed at, even isolated. Some labeled you too much, too sensitive, too intense. But heaven didn't call you too much, heaven called you set apart. Isn't it remarkable how purity is mocked until people realize it's what they needed all along? Isn't it tragic how the world romanticizes rebellion but leaves hearts empty in its aftermath? You saw through that facade. You didn't just protect your body, you defended your destiny. That's something few understand. Daniel, chapter 1, verse 8, confirms that Daniel, a young exile in Babylon, surrounded by indulgence, resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. That private, costly decision shifted an empire. He was promoted not because he played along, but because he stood alone. You've walked in that same spirit, quiet loyalty, silent resistance, sacred restraint. This purity didn't come without pain. You missed circles others glorified, lost relationships that seemed promising, watched others gain opportunities that could have been yours if you'd compromised. But you didn't. You didn't sell your calling for clout or trade your covenant for convenience. That purity is a battleground warfare of the soul, and you fought valiantly. The late Cardinal Francis Arins, a revered Nigerian theologian, once said, "A person who knows how to say no in silence is stronger than one who shouts yes in a crowd." That was you. You didn't need to prove your strength with noise, you proved it with restraint. In a small city, a woman named Anaka worked at a fashion agency known for scandalous branding. After declining a provocative campaign, she was pushed out. Years later, that agency sought her to lead a modest wear project when market trends shifted. She didn't bend to trends, she helped birth one through integrity. You carried that same weight of obedience not just publicly, but especially privately. You said no when no one was watching, honored God when it was easier to say, just this once. You didn't just avoid sin, you confronted it with sacred defiance, and heaven wrote it down. Have you noticed how butterflies keep their wings hidden in the cocoon while the world moves on? They're not late, they're in transformation. You've been hidden not because you're unworthy, but because you're being formed for flight. Now, what you preserved in silence is about to be unveiled with beauty. Purity wasn't just about physical boundaries, it was about protecting your oil. Maintaining clean rivers in a polluted land, proving holiness still has power in a world that forgets what sacred means. You've done that quietly, repeatedly, righteously, not for praise but for purpose, not for applause but for alignment. You didn't avoid darkness, you chose light. That light is about to shine where shadows once ruled. The world teaches that elevation comes through visibility, charisma, or talent, but heaven measures differently. God doesn't lift people just because they're gifted. He lifts those who are guarded. He searches not for dazzling performance, but for unshakable purity. You've passed that test. You didn't climb with compromise in your pocket or barter your anointing for attention. You walked clean in a polluted system. The higher the altitude, the thinner the air, the greater the pressure. If you couldn't stay anchored on the ground, you'd never survive the summit. God didn't delay your promotion to punish you. He delayed it to preserve you. He knew that lifting you too soon could crush what your purity hadn't yet strengthened. Chosen one after the valleys. Silence, resistance, rejection, testing, and loneliness. Heaven has made one thing clear. God is proud of you, not just for the outcome, but for the obedience. Not just for what you achieved, but for how you endured, believed without seeing loved. When empty stood when no one clapped, chose the narrow road when the wide one was easier. You didn't fold, compromise, or quit. Now, heaven is not only watching, it is responding. You're stepping into a divine reward not because you were perfect, but because you were faithful. This message was never about hype. It was about alignment, not manipulation, but reminding you of who you are and why heaven is moving on your behalf. If this stirred your spirit, confirmed what God's been whispering, please like this video to spread the word to other chosen ones. Share it with someone walking through a silent season. Comment below what part spoke to your spirit the loudest. Subscribe so you don't miss future prophetic encouragements. To those who've supported this channel through super thanks watching, commenting, or praying thank you. Whether you gave financially or your time, your support is deeply appreciated. Every seed you sow, even in silence, is seen in heaven. Now I speak this blessing over you. May the God who sees in secret reward you openly. May every hidden tear become a visible testimony. May the tables turn in your favor. May doors no man could open swing wide for you. May your name be spoken in rooms your feet haven't entered yet. May the peace of God guard your heart as you rise. You are chosen, you are called, you are being lifted. Heaven is proud. Until next time, stay aligned, stay faithful, stay anchored in truth. Shalom and favor be upon you always. Amen.